The shuttle bay doors of Terra Station opened with a deep rumble that Ambassador Velthar felt through his webbed feet. The amphibious diplomat adjusted his ceremonial robes and checked his translation device one final time. This was his first visit to a human facility, and everything he had studied about these strange mammals had left him with more questions than answers. The most troubling question of all was why every human settlement, ship, and space station looked like a military fortress ready for war. Captain Hansel stepped forward to greet him. The human male was average height by their species standards, with dark hair and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. What caught Velthar's attention immediately was the weapon on Hansol's hip. The diplomatic briefings had mentioned that humans carried personal defense tools, but the device looked powerful enough to punch holes through starship hulls. "Welcome to Terra Station, Ambassador Velthar," Hansol said with a smile that showed his white teeth. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "Thank you, Captain Hansol. The journey was indeed pleasant." Velthar tried not to stare at the weapon, but his eyes kept drifting to it. "I must say your station is quite impressive from the outside." Hansol nodded and gestured for them to walk toward the main corridor. "We're proud of Terra Station. It serves as our primary diplomatic and trade hub for this sector." As they walked, Velthar noticed more humans moving through the corridors. Every single one carried at least one weapon. Some had small devices clipped to their clothing, while others carried larger equipment slung across their backs. Even the humans who looked like civilians wore what appeared to be armored clothing. "Captain Hansol, if I may ask a question," Velthar began carefully. "I noticed that your people seem to be very well armed. Is there a security concern I should know about?" Hansol's step faltered for just a moment, and his smile became slightly stiff. "Just standard precautions, Ambassador. You can never be too careful in space." They passed by what looked like a school area where young humans were learning. Velthar was shocked to see that even children as young as 10 years old had small weapons attached to their school uniforms. The weapons looked like toys, but his trained diplomatic eye could tell they were real and functional. "Even your children carry weapons," Velthar observed, trying to keep his voice neutral. "Basic safety equipment," Hansol replied quickly. "Children need to learn responsibility early. It's part of our culture." The explanation felt hollow to Velthar. In his 70 years of diplomatic service, he had visited hundreds of species across the galaxy. None of them armed their children with what looked like military-grade equipment. They entered a large viewing area where Velthar could see the external structure of Terra Station. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see weapon systems built into every surface. Gun turrets, missile launchers, and energy weapons covered the station like scales on a fish. Some of the weapons were larger than entire spacecraft. From his homeworld, "Impressive defensive capabilities," Velthar commented. "We like to be prepared," Hansol said simply. A woman approached them from across the viewing area. She had long, dark hair tied back in a practical style and wore what looked like a scientist's uniform. But even she carried multiple weapons and wore armored clothing under her lab coat. "Ambassador Velthar, this is Dr. Sujin, our chief xenobiologist. She'll be giving you a tour of our research facilities." Dr. Sujin extended her hand in the human greeting gesture. "It's an honor to meet you, Ambassador. I've studied your people's biology and culture. Fascinating adaptations to your water world." "Thank you, Dr. Sujin. I look forward to learning about your research." As Captain Hansol left them, Dr. Sujin began walking toward another section of the station. "I understand this is your first time on a human facility. What do you think so far?" "It's very impressive," Velthar said diplomatically. "Though I must admit I'm curious about the heavy fortifications. Your people seem prepared for a major military conflict." For just a moment, Dr. Sujin's expression darkened. Her eyes got a distant look, and her hand moved unconsciously toward one of her weapons. Then she caught herself and smiled again. "Historical necessity," she said with a forced lightness. "Humans have learned that it's better to be safe than sorry." They entered the research sector, and Velthar was amazed by the advanced laboratories and equipment. But even here, in what should have been a peaceful scientific area, he noticed weapon storage units built into the walls. Emergency weapon lockers were placed every few meters, and each one contained enough firepower to level a small building. Dr. Sujin, may I ask what historical events led to such extensive military preparations? Dr. Sujin stopped at one of the laboratory windows and looked out at space. The universe can be a dangerous place, Ambassador. Humans have learned that lesson the hard way. But surely the current galactic peace treaties provide adequate protection. The Galactic Council has maintained stability for over 2 centuries. The Galactic Council protects against known threats, Dr. Sujin said quietly. But there are things out there that the Council has never encountered. Velthar felt a chill run through his amphibious skin. What kind of things? Dr. Sujin was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful and controlled. Things that don't follow the normal rules. Things that make our military preparations look reasonable by comparison. They continued the tour through more research areas. Velthar saw laboratories working on new types of weapons he had never imagined. One lab was developing bullets that could apparently damage targets in other dimensions. Another was working on shields that could protect against attacks that hadn't been invented yet. This seems like very advanced weapons research for a peaceful species, Velthar commented. Peace is only possible when you're prepared to defend it, Dr. Sujin replied. They passed through a training area where human children and adults practiced with weapons together. The children, some as young as 8 years old, handled devices that could probably destroy small spacecraft. They moved with practiced skill, as if they had been training their entire lives. How long do humans train with weapons? Velthar asked. From the time they can walk, Dr. Sujin said matter-of-factly. Every human learns basic combat skills. It's not optional. But why? What threat requires every member of your species to be a soldier? Dr. Sujin stopped walking and looked directly at Velthar. Her eyes held a sadness that seemed far older than her apparent age. Ambassador, what do you know about humanity's early space exploration efforts? The basic historical records show successful colonization of several systems, followed by rapid military expansion. Some species in the Galactic Council consider humans to be naturally aggressive. The records don't tell the whole story, Dr. Sujin said softly. Would you like to know what really happened during our early expansion? Very much so. Dr. Sujin led him to a secure information terminal. She entered several access codes and pulled up files that were marked with security classifications Velthar had never seen before. These are from our colonial period, about 3 centuries ago. Most of the detailed records are classified, but I can show you the basic timeline. The display showed a map of human expansion into space. At first, it looked normal. Colonies established, trade routes opened, populations growing. But then Velthar noticed something strange. Several colony markers changed from green to red, then disappeared entirely. What happened to these colonies? He asked. They went dark. All communication stopped. When rescue ships arrived, they found nothing. No people, no buildings, no signs that anyone had ever lived there. Just empty planets with perfect environmental conditions. Pirates, raiders. We thought so at first. But there were never any signs of battle. No weapon damage, no bodies, nothing taken. The colonies hadn't been attacked or robbed. They had simply stopped existing. Velthar stared at the display. How many colonies? 17 in the first 50 years. Each time, thousands of people just vanished without explanation. What did your government do? What any rational government would do. We militarized. We armed our colonies better, sent military escorts with civilian ships, and developed new weapons to fight whatever was taking our people. Did it work? Dr. Sujin was quiet for a long moment. For a while. The disappearances stopped. But the cost was that every human settlement became a fortress and every human became a soldier. They continued through more areas of the station. Everywhere Velthar looked, he saw evidence of a species that had been shaped by some terrible threat. The weapons weren't just tools. They were part of human culture now. Children played games that taught combat tactics. Art and music often had military themes. Even their architecture was designed with defense in mind. Dr. Sujin, what do you think happened to those lost colonies? I have theories, but theories aren't facts, and the facts are classified far above my level. Who would have access to those facts? Earth's Global Defense Initiative has the complete records, but they don't share them easily, even with other humans. As the tour continued, Velthar began to understand that he was seeing only the surface of something much deeper. Every human he met had the same look in their eyes, a watchfulness, a readiness for danger that never went away. They were polite and friendly, but under now. Earth looked peaceful from orbit, a blue and green world that seemed to glow with life. But as Velthar's shuttle approached the planet's surface, he could see the same pattern that had troubled him on Terra Station. Every city was built like a fortress. Weapon systems covered the landscape like metal forests. Even the orbital elevators had enough firepower to level continents. The shuttle landed at Geneva Spaceport, where Director Chang Min of the Global Defense Initiative waited to meet him. The human male was older than the others Velthar had met, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent worrying about things most people never had to think about. He wore a simple uniform, but Velthar could see the outline of armor underneath and weapons built into his clothing. What struck the diplomat most were the scars on Changmin's hands and neck. They were too precise to be from accidents, too deliberate to be from normal violence. They looked like marks left by something that didn't follow the usual rules of how injuries happened. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Velthar," Changmin said as they walked toward a waiting transport vehicle. "I understand you have questions about human military capabilities." "I do, Director Changmin. Your species seems prepared for a conflict that would dwarf anything the Galactic Council has ever seen. I'm trying to understand why." Changmin was quiet as they boarded the transport. The vehicle was heavily armored and equipped with weapon systems that seemed far too powerful for simple ground transportation. As they drove through Geneva, Velthar could see that the city's beautiful architecture hid defensive systems throughout. "Tell me, Ambassador, what does your species fear most?" Changmin asked as they traveled. "Extinction, I suppose. The death of our world, or our people. And what preparations has your government made against that fear?" "We have emergency protocols, evacuation plans, some defensive measures. Would you like to see what preparations look like when extinction isn't just a fear, but a memory?" They descended into underground levels that went far deeper than should have been possible. The elevator ride took nearly 10 minutes, passing through multiple security checkpoints and blast doors that could probably stop planet-cracking weapons. The underground complex was enormous. Corridors stretched in all directions, lined with storage areas, training facilities, and equipment that Velthar couldn't even identify. But what amazed him most were the weapons. Room after room filled with devices that looked like they could reshape reality itself. "This is just one of our smaller preparation facilities," Changmin explained as they walked. "We have hundreds like this around Earth, and thousands more throughout human space." They entered a vast chamber where a young woman was demonstrating weapons to a group of trainees. She moved with fluid grace, handling devices that seemed to bend light around them and make space itself ripple. When she fired one of the weapons at a test target, the target didn't explode or burn. It simply stopped existing, leaving behind a perfectly spherical hole in reality that hurt to look at. "Ambassador Velthar, this is Lieutenant Boram of our Tactical Division," Changmin said. Boram set down her weapon and approached them. She looked young, maybe 25 in human years, but her eyes held the same watchful wariness that Velthar had seen in every human he'd met. "Honor to meet you, Ambassador," she said politely. "Lieutenant Boram, may I ask what that weapon does?" "Existence disruption," she said matter-of-factly. "It removes things from reality rather than just destroying them. Useful against targets that don't stay destroyed normally." Velthar felt his amphibious skin grow cold. "What kind of targets don't stay destroyed?" Boram and Changmin exchanged a look. "Show him," Changmin said quietly. Boram led them to a secure storage area and pulled up holographic files on a display terminal. "These are training scenarios based on real encounters," she explained, "from our early colonial period. The first hologram showed a normal human colony on a green planet. People were going about their daily lives, children playing in parks, adults working in fields and factories. It looked peaceful and prosperous. Then the recording shifted to security footage from the same colony 3 days later. The buildings were still there, the equipment still worked, but every single person had vanished. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that reality itself looked wrong. Shadows fell upward in some places. Water flowed in impossible directions. The laws of physics seemed to be breaking down. What happened to the people? Velthar asked. We don't know, Boram said. They weren't killed, they weren't taken, they were just removed from existence. The next hologram showed a rescue team arriving at the colony. The humans were wearing armor unlike anything Velthar had seen, with devices attached that seemed to bend space around them. They moved carefully, testing each step before taking it, as if they didn't trust the ground to stay solid. When the rescue team entered the colony's central building, things got worse. The recording showed corridors that were longer on the inside than the outside, rooms that existed in places where no rooms could fit, and doors that opened onto views of star systems that shouldn't have been visible from that planet. The rescue team lost 3 members in that building, Boram explained. They walked through a door and simply weren't there anymore. Not dead, not missing. They had never existed. We had to check our own records to remember their names. How is that possible? It shouldn't be, Changmin said grimly. But possibility doesn't matter when you're facing something that doesn't follow the rules. They continued through more files. Velthar saw colony after colony that had suffered similar fates. Each time humans had responded with better weapons, stronger armor, and more sophisticated detection equipment. But the disappearances continued. How did you finally stop it? Velthar asked. We didn't stop it, Boram said. We just got better at fighting it. She showed him recordings of later encounters. Humans had developed weapons that could apparently damage empty space itself, armor that protected against attacks that hadn't happened yet, and shields that could block things that didn't exist. The battles looked like wars against reality itself. This is why every human learns to fight, Changmin explained. This is why we arm our children and fortify our schools. This is why our peace treaties with other species include clauses about immediate military assistance if anyone goes missing without explanation. They moved to another section of the facility where an elderly man was working with classified files. His name was Yunho, and he had been an archivist for 40 years. He looked up when they approached, and Velthar could see a deep sadness in his eyes. Yunho maintains our historical records, Changmin said. He knows more about the early colonial period than anyone alive. Ambassador, Yunho said in a voice that sounded like he had seen too much. What they've shown you today is just the beginning. The really classified files tell a much darker story. What do you mean? Yunho looked at Changmin, who nodded permission. The disappearances didn't stop when we developed better weapons. They just changed tactics. How so? They learned. Whatever was taking our people, it adapted to our defenses. When we built stronger weapons, it found ways around them. When we created better armor, it discovered new ways to attack. We've been in an arms race for 3 centuries with something that shouldn't exist. Velthar felt like the temperature in the room had dropped. Are you saying this threat is still active? We think so, Yunho said quietly. We've had 17 incidents in the past 10 years. Small ones. Single ships going missing, remote stations losing contact for a few hours then coming back online, with no memory of what happened. But the pattern is familiar. Changmin stepped closer. This is why we need to ask you a difficult question, Ambassador. How well defended is your homeworld? We have standard defensive systems, nothing compared to what I've seen here but adequate for known threats. What if the threat isn't known? Boram asked. What if it's something that your weapons can't touch, your sensors can't detect, and your shields can't stop? Velthar realized, with growing horror, what they were suggesting. You think it might spread to other species? We know it will, Changmin said grimly. The early incidents were random. Our colonies were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the recent ones show signs of intelligence, of planning. Whatever this thing is, it's learning about the galaxy beyond human space. They continued the tour through more sections. of the facility. Velthar saw laboratories working on weapons designed to fight concepts rather than objects, training areas where humans practiced fighting invisible enemies, and communication centers that monitored dimensions other species couldn't even detect. "This is our early warning system," a technician named Jiho explained as they visited the monitoring center. "We watch for signs of reality disturbance across 1,000 light years. When space starts acting wrong, we know something is coming." The monitoring equipment looked like it belonged in a science fiction story. Screens showed readings of things like dimensional stability and existence coherence. Most of the readings were steady, but Velthar noticed several areas showing yellow and orange warnings. "What do those warnings mean?" he asked. "Minor disturbances," Jiho said. "Could be natural phenomena. Could be something testing the barriers between." The classified historical archive was buried so deep beneath Geneva that Velthar wondered if they had reached the planet's core. Admiral Haywan led him through corridors lined with security systems that could probably stop small armies. The human woman moved with the careful precision of someone who had fought battles that most people couldn't imagine. Her left arm had been replaced with military-grade cybernetics that hummed with barely contained energy. When Velthar asked about it, she simply said, "Occupational hazard," and changed the subject. "Ambassador, what I'm about to show you is classified at levels that most humans never see," Admiral Haywan said as they approached a massive vault door. "The historical records you're about to access have been restricted for nearly 300 years. Why share them with me now? Because the situation is getting worse, and we need the Galactic Council to understand what we're really facing." The vault door opened with a sound like thunder. Inside, holographic displays showed star maps, colony records, and battle footage from humanity's early expansion into space. But something about the images looked wrong. The colors seemed too bright, the shadows fell in impossible directions, and some of the scenes showed events that Velthar's mind couldn't quite process. "This is the complete record of New Busan Colony," Admiral Haywan said, activating a holographic display. "Our first major encounter with what we now call the Hungry Dark." The hologram showed a beautiful world with blue skies, green forests, and crystal-clear oceans. A thriving human colony of 50,000 people had built cities that blended seamlessly with the natural environment. Children played in parks while their parents worked in laboratories and factories. It looked like paradise. "New Busan was our pride," Admiral Haywan explained. "Perfect climate, rich resources, advanced technology. We thought we had found the ideal world for human expansion." The recording shifted to show Captain Jin Woo, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, having breakfast with his family. His wife was showing their young daughter how to tend the plants in their garden, while their son practiced with a small learning device. They looked happy and peaceful, unaware that they were living in the last normal morning their world would ever see. "Captain Jinwoo was the colony's administrator," Admiral Haywan said. "A good man who loved his family and his work. He kept detailed records right up until the end." The scene changed suddenly. The sky above the colony began to ripple like water, and a dark crack appeared in the air itself. Through the crack, something began to seep into normal space. It wasn't quite energy, and wasn't quite matter. It was more like absence given form, darkness that consumed light and meaning. "What am I looking at?" Velthar asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The first recorded breach, the moment when something from outside reality found its way into our dimension. The creatures that poured through the crack defied description. They moved like liquid shadow but had substance when they touched things. Where they passed, the laws of physics began to break down. Gravity reversed in some areas, time moved backwards in others, and solid objects began to exist in multiple places at once. The colony's defensive systems activated automatically, but their weapons passed harmlessly through the invading entities. Laser beams bent away from targets that shouldn't have been able to deflect energy. Missiles exploded without causing damage to things that should have been vulnerable to physical force. The standard defensive protocols were useless, Admiral Haywan said grimly. These entities weren't just immune to conventional weapons. They existed in a way that made conventional weapons meaningless. Velthar watched in horror as the creatures moved through the colony. They didn't kill people in any normal sense. Instead, they seemed to consume the very concept of the people's existence. Families vanished not just from sight, but from reality itself. Buildings remained standing, but the memories of who had lived in them began to fade. Captain Jinwoo made a desperate attempt to save his family. Security footage showed him grabbing weapons and armor from emergency lockers. But when he fired at the creatures, his bullets simply ceased to exist the moment they made contact. His wife and children were standing right behind him one moment, and the next moment, he couldn't remember why he had been trying to protect empty air. "This is the worst part," Admiral Haywan said quietly. "The entities don't just destroy. They unmake. They remove things so completely that even the memory of their existence starts to disappear." The recording showed Captain Jinwoo becoming increasingly confused as more of his reality was consumed. He found family photos where faces had been erased, but he couldn't remember whose faces should have been there. He read his own diary entries about people he loved, but the names meant nothing to him anymore. Commander Mi Young of the colony's defense force appeared in the recordings, a stern woman with tactical training who quickly realized what they were facing. She gathered the surviving military personnel and made a decision that would haunt human space doctrine for centuries. She decided to detonate the colony's main fusion reactor, Admiral Haywan explained. A deliberate nuclear explosion that would destroy everything within 50 kilometers, to stop the entities, to prevent them from spreading. Commander Mi Young realized that conventional evacuation was impossible. The entities were consuming the very concept of the colonists' existence. Even if someone escaped physically, they might be erased retroactively from reality itself. The final recordings from New Busan showed Commander Mi Young in the reactor control room, her hands shaking as she entered the detonation codes. Through the windows, she could see the entities spreading across the landscape like a dark tide. The sky was full of impossible colors, and the horizon curved in directions that shouldn't exist. "Tell Earth what happened here," she said into her recording device. "Tell them that death is not the worst thing that can happen to someone. Being forgotten completely is worse." The explosion was visible from orbit. It created a fireball that temporarily pushed the entities back through their dimensional crack, sealing the breach with raw energy. But the cost was everything on the planet's surface. 50,000 people died to prevent something worse from spreading to other worlds. "The explosion worked," Admiral Haywan said, "but it left scars in space-time that we can still detect 3 centuries later. The area around New Busan emits what we call wrongness. Ships that pass too close experience equipment failures, crew members report missing time, and reality itself becomes unstable." Professor Do-hyun joined them at this point, an elderly man who had spent 40 years studying the entities. His hair was completely white, and his eyes held the haunted look of someone who had stared into the abyss for too long. "Ambassador, what you've seen today is just one incident," Professor Do-hyun said. "We've documented over 300 similar breaches in the past 3 centuries. Each time we've learned a little more about what we're fighting." "What have you learned?" "That they come from a realm where entropy flows backwards, where existence itself is a form of food. They're not evil in any way we understand evil. They're hungry, and we're made of the kind of energy they need to survive." Professor Do-hyun activated another display showing the theoretical physics of the entity's home dimension. The equations hurt to look at directly, full of mathematical concepts that violated basic logic. "Normal matter and energy are held together by forces we understand," he explained. "But these entities exist in a state of controlled collapse. They're made of negated existence, powered by consuming the reality of other things." "How many of these breaches have occurred?" "Active breaches? 17 major ones and over 200 minor incidents. But that's not the really terrifying part." "What's the terrifying part?" "They're getting smarter. The early incidents were random, like predators following scent trails. But the recent breaches show signs of planning. They're testing our defenses, learning our weaknesses, and preparing for something bigger." Admiral Haywan pulled up more recent files. "This is from last year. A science station near the galactic rim went dark for 6 hours. When it came back online, the crew reported normal operations, but our deep scans showed reality distortions. Throughout the station, the recordings from the station looked normal at first glance. Scientists went about their work, equipment functioned properly, and everything appeared routine. But when Velthar looked more carefully, he could see subtle wrongness in the details. Shadows that moved independently of their objects. Reflections that showed different scenes than what was actually happening. People walking through walls, as if the walls weren't there. The entities are learning to be subtle, Professor Do-hyun explained. Instead of consuming entire colonies at once, they're making small changes to reality. Removing a few people here, altering some physical laws, there. Testing to see how much they can change without being noticed. What happens if they succeed? If they establish a permanent foothold in our dimension, they could begin consuming the entire galaxy, not destroying it, but unmaking it. Making it so that stars, planets, and civilizations had never existed in the first place. The implications hit Velthar like a physical blow. This wasn't just about human colonies. This was about the survival of reality itself. Why haven't you shared this information with the Galactic? Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega existed in a place that most species would consider impossible. It floated in the void between galaxies, surrounded by sensor arrays that could detect disturbances in dimensions that other civilizations couldn't even imagine. Admiral Sung-ho met Velthar at the docking bay, his weathered face showing the strain of someone who spent his life watching for threats that might never come, but couldn't be ignored. "Welcome to Omega Station, Ambassador," Admiral Sung-ho said, as they walked through corridors lined with monitoring equipment. "This is where we keep watch over the spaces between spaces." The station itself defied conventional design. Corridors curved in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Rooms were larger inside than outside, and some areas existed in multiple dimensions at once. Velthar's inner ear told him he was walking upward, but his eyes said the floor was level. "The architecture is intentionally non-standard," Dr. Kehoe explained as he joined them. The scientist was younger than most of the humans Velthar had met, but his eyes held the same haunted knowledge. Standard geometry becomes unreliable when you're monitoring dimensional boundaries. We have to build in ways that remain stable when reality itself starts to shift. They entered the main monitoring center where dozens of technicians watched displays that showed readings Velthar couldn't understand. Charts tracked something called existence coherence across thousands of light years. Graphs measured dimensional barrier strength in units that had no meaning to anyone but humans. Alert systems monitored for reality disturbance events in real time. "What exactly are you monitoring?" Velthar asked. "Everything," Dr. Kehoe said simply. "We track the stability of space-time itself. When the hungry dark starts testing the barriers between dimensions, reality begins to show stress. Fractures. We can detect those fractures from incredible distances." He led Velthar to a display showing the galactic map covered in different colored zones. Most areas glowed with steady green light, but scattered patches showed yellow, orange, and red. Warnings. Green means normal dimensional stability, Dr. Kehoe explained. Yellow indicates minor fluctuations that could be natural phenomena or early testing by the entities. Orange shows active probing of dimensional barriers. Red means an active breach is either occurring or imminent. "How many red zones are there?" "Currently?" 17 that we're tracking actively. 3 of them are in non-human space." The implications of that statement hit Velthar like cold water. The threat wasn't contained to human colonies anymore. It was spreading to other species, who had no idea what they were facing. "Have you warned the affected civilizations?" Dr. Kehoe and Admiral Sung-ho exchanged a look that spoke of years of frustration. "We've tried," Admiral Sung-ho said. "The Centauri Confederation dismissed our warnings as human propaganda. The Vegan Republic accused us of trying to expand our military influence. The Andromedan Council refused to even meet with our diplomats." "What happened to the affected areas?" "The Centauri trading post Gamma 7 went silent 3 days ago. All communications stopped, but long-range scans show the facility is still physically intact. The Vegan research station Beta Prime has reported equipment malfunctions that match early-stage reality distortion. The Andromedan mining colony Kepler 442c has had 17 workers disappear over the past month, but their records show no evidence that those workers ever existed. They moved to another section of the monitoring center where General Nari was, reviewing tactical displays. The human woman had the bearing of someone who had fought battles in environments where normal military doctrine didn't apply. Her uniform included equipment that seemed designed to anchor her to reality itself. "Ambassador, let me show you what we're really up against," General Nari said, activating a holographic battle display. The hologram showed the battle of the Kepler Threshold, one of humanity's most desperate fights against the hungry dark. A major dimensional breach had opened near a star system with 3 inhabited worlds. Instead of individual entities seeping through, the breach had allowed something vast and coordinated to begin manifesting in normal space. "This was 15 years ago," General Nari explained. "Our early warning systems detected massive dimensional instability, but by the time our response fleet arrived, the entities had begun consuming the star itself. The battle footage was unlike anything Velthar had ever seen. Human ships fired weapons that seemed to tear holes in space itself. The entities responded by making the attacking vessels exist in multiple places at once, causing them to collide with themselves. Some of the human weapons apparently worked by making targets forget they had ever been real. How do you fight something that can unmake your ships? Carefully, and with weapons designed to work in impossible conditions," General Nari said grimly. "Our reality anchors keep our ships stable in local space. Our existence missiles can damage targets that don't technically exist. Our dimensional shields can block attacks that haven't happened yet." The battle had raged for 6 days. Human casualties mounted as ships and crews were removed from reality entirely. But the entities had also taken losses as human weapons found ways to damage things that shouldn't have been vulnerable to physical force. The turning point came when Admiral Jung-Soo made a decision that still gives our strategists nightmares, General Nari continued. The hologram showed a human dreadnought moving directly into the star's corona, its hull glowing with heat that should have vaporized any known material. Instead of attacking the entities directly, the ship began firing into the star itself. They deliberately destabilized the star's core, Velthar realized with horror. It was the only way. The entities were using the star's energy to maintain their breach into normal space. By causing a controlled stellar collapse, Admiral Jung-Soo cut off their power source and forced the breach to close. The star's death had been spectacular and terrible. The controlled collapse created a pocket of twisted spacetime that would remain dangerous for thousands of years, but it had also sealed the dimensional breach and prevented the entities from consuming the 3 inhabited worlds. Admiral Jung-Soo and her entire crew were lost when the star collapsed, General Nari said quietly. They knew they were going to die when they made the attack run, but they saved 4 billion lives by sacrificing themselves. Captain Tae-jin of the Dimensional Warfare Division joined them at this point. He was younger than the others, but his uniform included more exotic equipment than Velthar had seen on any human. Devices that seemed to bend light around them, tools that made space itself ripple when activated, and weapons that hurt to look at directly. Captain Tae-jin commands our rapid response units, Admiral Sung-ho explained. When dimensional breaches occur, his teams are usually the first to engage. How do you train for fighting something that doesn't follow physical laws? Velthar asked. By learning to break the laws ourselves, Captain Tae-jin said matter-of-factly. Our standard equipment includes reality anchors to keep us stable, existence preservers to prevent retroactive deletion, and weapons designed to function in environments where physics stops working normally. He demonstrated some of the equipment. A small device on his belt apparently kept his personal timeline stable, preventing enemies from attacking him in the past. Another tool could anchor objects to reality so strongly that they would continue to exist even if someone tried to unmake them conceptually. This is why every human ship carries this equipment now, he explained. When you're fighting enemies that can edit reality, you need protection against attacks that normal shields can't block. They visited the station's research division, where Dr. Yoonjung was working on new defensive technologies. She was a survivor of the Vega colony incident, one of the few people who had witnessed a dimensional breach and lived to describe it. Her work focused on developing weapons that could damage abstract concepts rather than physical objects. Dr. Yoon-jung, can you explain how you fight something that exists as pure negation? Velthar asked. She looked up from her work, and Velthar could see the deep sadness in her eyes. You fight them with negation of negation. If they're made of unexistence, you hit them with weapons that make unexistence itself impossible. She showed him a device that looked like a simple metal rod, but the space around it seemed more solid somehow, more real. This is an existence amplifier, she explained. It makes everything around it more real than normal. When the entities try to unmake something in its area of effect, they encounter resistance they can't overcome. How did you develop this? Dr. Yoon-jung was quiet for a moment, her hand unconsciously moving to a scar on her neck that looked similar to the ones Velthar had seen on other humans. My husband was removed during the Vega colony incident, she said finally. Not killed. Removed from reality so completely that even my memories of him started to fade. I only remember he existed because I found our wedding photos and realized I was in pictures with someone who wasn't there anymore. The pain in her voice was raw and immediate, even though the incident had happened 20 years ago. I've spent 2 decades developing weapons to fight things that can do that to people. Every breakthrough brings me a little closer to making sure no one else loses someone the way I lost him. They continued through more research. The emergency klaxons aboard Terra Station created a sound unlike anything Velthar had ever heard. They didn't just produce noise, they seemed to vibrate through dimensions, creating harmonics that made reality itself feel more solid. Fleet. Admiral Young-soo moved through the command center with practiced efficiency, coordinating the deployment of thousands of ships from locations across human space. Dimensional breach formation confirmed in the Centauri Beta system, announced Commander So-young from her monitoring station. The colony ship New Prosperity is directly in the manifestation zone. Estimated time until full breach, 2 hours, 47 minutes. Velthar watched in amazement as the human response unfolded. This wasn't just a military mobilization. It was a coordinated effort involving every aspect of human civilization. Military vessels launched from orbital installations, but civilian ships also deployed carrying specialized equipment. Even merchant vessels transformed themselves into carriers for reality anchor arrays and existence preservation systems. Admiral Young-soo, how many ships are you deploying? Velthar asked. Everything we can get to the breach point in time, Young-soo replied without taking his eyes off the tactical displays. 4,000 military vessels, 12,000 civilian ships equipped for dimensional warfare, and 30,000 support, craft carrying specialized equipment. That's almost your entire space fleet. When reality itself is under attack, you don't hold anything in reserve. Through the command center's viewing windows, Velthar could see the massive mobilization taking place. Ships of every size and configuration were moving with purpose that spoke of years of practice. But what struck him most was that even the smallest vessels, personal shuttles and private yachts, carried weapon systems that could probably level cities. Captain Wonbin of the battleship Indomitable Will appeared on the main communication screen. He was already in his command chair, surrounded by displays showing weapon readiness and dimensional stability readings. Admiral, the first response fleet is ready for immediate deployment. All reality cannons are charged, existence missiles are armed, and dimensional shields are at full strength. Proceed to the breach point, Captain Wonbin. Remember, the Centauri colony ship doesn't know what's happening. They'll think you're attacking them when you open fire. Understood, Admiral. We'll try to establish communication, but saving them takes priority over explaining ourselves. The Indomitable Will was unlike any warship Velthar had seen from other species. Its hull seemed to shift and waver, as if it existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapon systems covered every surface, but many of them didn't look like normal guns or missiles. Some appeared to be devices designed to edit reality itself. Commander Yu Jin led a squadron of fighter craft that looked more like flying works of abstract art than military vehicles. Their hulls bent light around them in impossible ways, and their weapons seemed to fire concepts rather than energy beams. Fighter Squadron Alpha ready for deployment, Commander Yu Jin reported. All existence preservers online, reality anchors stable, were loaded with full complements of dimensional torpedoes and concept killer missiles. Dr. Hyun-soo appeared on another screen from his position aboard the research vessel, Theoretical Framework. His ship was designed to analyze and counter dimensional breaches in real time, equipped with instruments that could measure the strength of existence itself. Admiral, I'm reading massive distortions in the target area. This isn't a random breach. Something large and coordinated is forcing its way through from the other side. How large? The dimensional signature suggests something at least the size of a small moon, but composed entirely of negated existence. If it fully manifests in normal space, it could begin consuming matter on a planetary scale. The fleet moved through hyperspace toward the Centauri system with speed that impressed even Velthar, who had seen the fastest ships of a dozen species. But these human vessels seemed to travel through dimensions that other civilizations couldn't access, taking shortcuts through folded spacetime that reduced travel time by orders of magnitude. How are your ships moving so fast? Velthar asked. Dimensional navigation, Admiral Young-soo explained. When you're fighting enemies that exist between dimensions, you need to be able to travel there too. Our ships can move through spaces that don't technically exist, allowing us to reach anywhere in the galaxy within hours. As they approached the breach point, the scale of what they were facing became clear. Space itself looked wrong in the target area. Stars appeared to be in multiple positions at once, and some sections of empty space were darker than should have been possible. Through it all, reality was beginning to tear like fabric under stress. The Centauri colony ship New Prosperity floated helplessly in the center of the disturbance. It was a beautiful vessel designed for peaceful exploration, with elegant curves and large viewing windows that allowed its passengers to enjoy the journey between stars. It was also completely defenseless against what was about to emerge. Captain Wanbin, begin dimensional bombardment of the breach point, Admiral Young-soo ordered. Try to seal the tear before it fully opens. The indomitable Will opened fire with weapons that defied description. Reality cannons fired beams that seemed to make space more solid around the breach. Existence missiles exploded in bursts of enhanced being that pushed against the encroaching nothingness. Concept killer projectiles struck at the very idea of the breach, trying to make it impossible for the tear to exist. For a moment it seemed to work. The dimensional tear began to shrink under the assault of weapons designed to fight abstract concepts. But then something pushed back from the other side with force that made space itself ripple. Admiral, the breach is expanding despite our bombardment, Captain Wanbin reported. Whatever's on the other side is too strong to stop with conventional, dimensional weapons. Through the tear, Velthar saw his first clear view of the hungry dark. They weren't creatures in any sense he understood. They were more like living voids, spaces where existence had been consumed and replaced with pure appetite. They moved like liquid shadow but had substance when they wanted to affect physical objects. Where they touched normal space, reality began to unravel. The first entities to emerge were scouts, relatively small beings about the size of fighter craft. They moved toward the Centauri colony ship with purpose that spoke of intelligence and planning. When the ship's crew tried to use their emergency communication systems, the signals simply vanished as if the very concept of communication was being consumed. The colony ship is trying to flee, Commander Yoo-jin reported from her fighter squadron. But they're moving directly into the main breach area. Stop them, Admiral Young-soo ordered. Use whatever force necessary, but don't let them get consumed by the entities. Commander Yoo-jin's fighters intercepted the colony ship with weapons that most species would consider acts of war. They fired nets of pure existence that temporarily paralyzed the Centauri vessel, then used tractor beams that anchored the ship to local reality to prevent it from accidentally moving into spaces where it might cease to exist. The Centauri are transmitting distress signals, Communications Officer Min Jung reported. They think we're attacking them. Explain the situation later, Admiral Young-soo replied grimly. Right now, keeping them alive is more important than keeping them happy. The main breach was fully opening now, and larger entities began to emerge. These were the size of small asteroids, moving with coordination that suggested a hive mind, or collective intelligence. They began systematically consuming the matter and energy around the breach point, growing larger and more substantial with each absorption. All ships, engage the primaries. Admiral Young-Soo ordered. Use existence amplifiers at maximum power. Don't let them establish a foothold in normal space. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic military history. Human ships fired weapons that made reality more real, trying to create zones where the entities couldn't exist. The entities responded by attacking the concept of the ships themselves, trying to make them never have been built. Some human vessels simply vanished as their existence was consumed, but their crews had been prepared for this possibility. Emergency. Existence preservers activated automatically, maintaining the crew's reality even when their ships were removed from space-time. Rescue ships equipped with reality reconstruction systems moved quickly to recover personnel whose vessels had been unmade. Captain J-Ho of the heavy cruiser Persistent Reality found his ship being attacked by an entity that was trying to consume the concept of his vessel's hull. Instead of retreating, he ordered his crew to overload their reality amplifiers and rammed directly into the creature. "If they want to make us not exist," he announced over the communication channels, "let's see how they handle maximum existence at point-blank range." The collision between enhanced reality and pure negation created an explosion that briefly tore holes between dimensions. When the energy cleared, both the entity and Captain J-Ho's ship were gone, but the local space-time had been stabilized enough to prevent more entities from emerging in that area. Dr. Hyun-soo worked frantically to analyze the entity's weakness while the battle raged around his research vessel. His instruments,